part 2 for 2 of an interview with Sean Jobst on globalism and Zionism.
Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It's my pleasure to have Sean Jobst on the show. Sean, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. You're an investigative journalist, independent researcher, and traveler. At least that's how you describe yourself on your blog. Your blog is sjobst blogspot.ca. It's sjobst.blogspot.ca. And, well, you have a lot of interesting posts on there. And, well, one thing is you recently came back from, I think it was Spain, where you gave a lecture there on Zionism and globalism. And maybe that's a good way to start about what we're going to talk about tonight. Zionism and globalism. What's all that about?
Well, if you look at the links between, you look at, everywhere you look at the Zionism issue, you see the issues with the connections with the international banking system, with them basically having a subversive element in each country. The major powers, they try to have a subversive element that they want to, distort the policy in their favor. That's tied into the banking system also. Then you have the role of like the Kalugi plan, and how it's mostly a lot of Zionists kind of advocating the mass immigration in Europe, but at the same time, and exclusively Jewish Israel. Then you have Mossad, and how Mossad uses Zionism in every country, which is kind of like these sleeper agents. So you look at all these different elements, and it kind of you see it that it's very tied into globalism. It's not just concerned with the state of Israel. It's more than that.
But the irony is that the only documents that do exist that discuss destroying a people is the Morgenthau Plan. And also some of the statements from Soviet propagandists. So we have the Morgenthau Plan, and if you look at something like the Rhine Meadow camps that Eisenhower ran, that seems to be a partial implementation of the Morgenthau Plan.
Yeah, you had over 2 million German citizens, like civilians. I'm not talking about military, just killed in these bombings. You had over 1 million German POWs killed in these camps. Then you had these various other atrocities, like, for example, I think in Denmark, parts of Denmark and Norway, you had they would clear the minefields with German soldiers. They would, like, have the German soldiers just walk across these minefields just to, obviously knowing they would kill them. Yeah. And you had all these, the treatment of POWs, of German POWs and German civilians.
Yeah, and you also had I think it was the French that used German soldiers as slave labor.
Yes. Which I can't say much about that, because our region of Germany did use French POWs.
Oh, yes.
But the Geneva Convention allows for that. But but the thing is how they're used, and the French did a collective punishment. Mm-hmm. And even against the so-called their own people, the so-called collaborationists,
which they define very broadly.
Yes,
because as you're talking 3.5, 4 years of occupation, people are eventually going to go along, just live life. And unfortunately, your definition of a collaboration had a very broad definition. But the occupation in France itself, relative to the other theaters of war, was very mild. And the destruction that France suffered during the Second World War, ironically, occurred not in the spring and early summer of 1940, but in the period of liberation of 1944-45.
Yes.
And so that was because they were fighting, as the Allies invaded. And, all the French civilians, I think D-Day, like 20,000 civilians were killed, French civilians. And, but this requires a reevaluation of that war, and that war has been so mythologized. It's been burned into our conscience as the good war. And the Holocaust narrative, of course, is a big part of that, because if they were so evil so as to plan to annihilate an entire race, then anything is justified. That's a large function of that. Of course, It's also, without that, you simply wouldn't have had the founding of Israel in 1948.
No, that was a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm.
To basically the early financial support of the National Socialist movement, and to embolden them to do basically a reaction to the Jewish supremacism with their own supremacism. Mm-hmm. And all these because there was some persecution of Jews that was exaggerated, but of course I doubt the extermination thesis, but all that you can easily see that the Zionists were definitely benefiting directly from this. They wanted this to happen, and that's why the Zionists early on in Germany they were closely cooperating with them.
Yeah, that's the same.
They used to attend the different party rallies. The Zionist groups in Germany used to march with them with their own flags, and you had a lot of the Jewish newspapers. Certain Jews that were veterans organizations, they were German veterans from World War I. They were patriotic Germans. Mm-hmm. They were shut down by their party because they believed in assimilation, which went against both the Hitler doctrine and the Zionist doctrine. But at the same time, you had the Hitler's regime was completely allowing all the Zionist newspapers that were still published. Their activities, their different organizations were still going on. So,
yeah, the whole idea that every Jew in Germany was rounded up is also not true, because I remember there was Otto Klemperer, the director, actually the father, I think, of Werner Klemperer, who played Colonel Klink in Hogan's Heroes.
Yes, yeah.
There's a thing called Berlin Diaries, and he spends, I think, a huge part of most of the war in Berlin. I think. Yeah. I'm thinking, wait a second.
Yeah, most of them were interned.
Like
there was basically a push for, hypothetically, at the end of the war against the Soviet Union, because they thought that they would defeat the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. But in an occupied Russia, they would then set aside a certain area that they could take the Jews to. Mm-hmm. And that was after basically the Havar Agreement failed basically.
That's right, and also throughout. I mean, didn't the SS also tried? Obviously, the policy prior to the war was expulsion.
Yes, and there was plans like Madagascar,
and there was a refusal on the World Jewish Congress to negotiate with the SS regarding the expulsion of Jews, because they wanted to concentrate them and to intensify the suffering in order to create that the political support for Zionism, for the Zionist project. They needed the Jews to suffer, the little Jews to suffer in Europe, and they got it.
Yeah, then you had statements like David Ben-Gurion. He said that he doesn't want the weak Jews to come to Israel, but to Palestine. He wants to weed out make it only the strongest. Because that's another thing. If you look at Zionism itself, you go back to the origins. Moses Hess, the modern origins. Moses Hess in 1862, Rome and Jerusalem. He's an interesting character because he's kind of this coalescence between Marxism, Zionism, and social Darwinism. Even he had a lot of social Darwinist theories, and he was actually the first person who talked about a race war. He actually, in his book, talked about a race war. And he was talking about a race war between the Slavs and the Germans. And that he talked about the Jewish role in that, and that how the Jews could use that to go to Palestine. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, this obsession about race that coincided with the growth of social Darwinism, even that's tied to Zionism. And all the German race theorists, they basically adopted it from the Zionists. Mm-hmm. This obsession about race and blood.
And that was sort of the spirit of the age of the 19th century. Especially with Darwin and the Wedgwoods and these English elite families too, had an obsession with bloodlines and racial purity.
Yes.
And they didn't think the Irish were white, by the way. So.
No. Well, yeah. White.
No.
Yeah, white itself is it's.
That's a construct.
It's a category. Yeah, it's a category that's why I like when I talk about my identity, I like to specify my specific ethnic groups. But then if I talk about a broader element, I talk about European, Indo-European.
Yeah, well, yeah.
There is a broader Indo-European, but I don't like this, focus on white.
Well, this is funny because we get in this rootless cosmopolitanism, which defines a lot of the international Jews and these things. They're very conscious about their own group, their tribe, as they say. But
very much so.
They deny that right or that consciousness to other groups because they want to. Again, it goes back to that solvent. They want to break down ethnic identity because when the host society is weak, they're stronger. Diversity is indeed their strength. I think that's a motto that came out of the Anti-Defamation League, which, of course, came out of B'nai B'rith, which is Freemasonry. So here we go again. But this idea, identity, I think a lot of this, we're seeing a trend now, because when we talk about these things, a large section of the population will just shut it down the moment you say, you identify that there might be organized Jewish treachery or intrigue, but they're just denying reality because there is such thing as organized Jewry. I'm sorry, if you don't believe that is, please explain to me the nation state of Israel and the Mossad. And
and I didn't create organizations like American Jewish Congress, World Jewish Congress. These are organizations that already exist. We're highlighting that. Yes.
You have AIPAC, which is an agent of Israel, which isn't even required to register as a foreign agent. So it exists. Okay, it exists. Just like other things exist. So let's be mature and let's be honest and let's talk about it.
But most people know deep down inside, but they just don't want to confront it, or they're scared. They're scared what it will do to their reputation.
Fear. It's just like the blind man, right? Who was cured. His parents feared the Sanhedrin when they were asked about the miracle that was performed, getting his eyesight back. And we're confronted with the latter-day Sanhedrin with these organizations.
And the Sanhedrin has actually been reconstructed in Israel not recently, but I think the mid 2000s, like 2005 or something like that. But they actually reconstituted the Sanhedrin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now so what we're confronted with is sort of this infiltration and control. The question I have is is it being used for something else though? It's very easy. You can if you're part of the ruling elite, or are the top using the Jews as scapegoats? Because they're an easy group to. This is where I was going with this. Is when you talk about white identity. That's a dialectic.
Yes. It is.
Because that's not going to go anywhere politically. That's going to alienate the vast majority of people. And it's going to shut down any honest discussion about about addressing Jewish power.
And it's actually easily harnessed by Zionists. And you have people like Richard Spencer and others. They've actually floated the idea of an alliance with the Likudists and the Kahanists. These extremist Zionists. Mm-hmm. So
because whiteness
it's not because it's not a true identity.
Because whiteness itself is a construct. It's a reaction because there is no ethnicity to whiteness. It's white or what we became when we went into suburbia and lost our identity.
It was all about ethnic group. What was your ethnic group?
Yeah.
Cultural group, yes.
In fact, Ian Michael Jones makes the case that even in the German language, there's no word for race.
I can see that because I think it has an Italian origin, the modern day razza.
Yeah, razza.
So, if I'm not mistaken,
I think that he talks about it as, I think it was Madison Grant who wrote, was it The Passing of the Great Race or something, and this sort of this broad white identity, which, wouldn't you say it's maybe more applicable in the South, if it at all, but really you get into the northern part, we're talking about the United States, where it was much more ethnic. And in the South, you had, there was much more of a broad white culture. And
yes, yeah.
Whereas in the North, it was much more diverse and complex. but nevertheless it was applied, because they wanted to sort of, again, denature or deracinate these groups to create a broad white consensus, sort of collectivize the nation for the post-war agenda, which was the American century, U.S. imperialism. And they couldn't do that with all these little ethnic groups because one thing was, in the run-up to the Second World War, or even the First World War, is you had a lot of Germans and Irish and Italians that weren't so keen on fighting for the British Empire.
No.
So if they had their ethnic identity, they're not going to be good cannon fodder for empire. You deny them their ethnic identity and they just become Americans, then they can be convinced to go off and fight and die for empire.
Yeah, you raised an interesting point. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way. Yes. And I have my own problems with that thesis as well, like the Madison Grant thesis, because his was more about the Nordic, so-called Nordic race.
Yes, that's right.
And I mean, I'm someone that I pride myself on my Alpine, mostly Alpine, but also some Mediterranean heritage. And I mean, so. But
here's the trick is if you look at it, and this gets in our discussion about globalism, and is the idea that they want to break down all ethnic distinctions and make everything sort of corporate monoculture and, kind of blend everything together, which is sort of an alchemical process, which gets into, I think gets back into Freemasonry.
Yeah.
Because they get into this ecumenicism and these things and everyone's the same.
Yeah, so-called brotherhood of man.
Exactly.
It sounds good, but the objective is, it's actually, you're forcing people to merge into one, to, become one.
Yeah.
Let me find the statement, but if you look back at what Kalergi said, he actually said something about we'll get them away from their families and we'll make them into the tyranny of individuals or something. It was something he phrased it, but he phrased it in a way of control. Because simultaneously he spoke about a blood nobility that he identified with the Jews, ironically, even though he himself wasn't Jewish, but he was financed by Max Warburg and the Rothschilds.
Yeah.
And that's a known fact. He admitted that in his own autobiography, and he had connections with Hjalmar Schacht as well. So you see all this coalescence there.
Because
it sounds good, but you're actually destroying everybody. Yeah, everybody becomes harmed in the process.
People think it's an episode of Star Trek, but it's funny that even Star Trek, the ethnic identity is still there. It's just the characters, Scotty, Irish, so even that doesn't obtain in Star Trek. But I'm saying, the colors of Benetton or something. They think it's just like everyone's like living in a cosmopolitan city and they're all 20-something. They have no kids, and it's all very exciting. But the reality is the individual. The individual, what really protects the individual is having some sort of corporate representation or identity, and that's primarily through, family, extended family, community, and the ethnicity of that community. And the institutions, such as the church or the parish and these things. And through those institutions, we maintain our own identity and our liberty, because we have these mediating institutions that protect us from the state itself or the corporate state. The corporate state wants to break everything down. They do this through psychological warfare, through advertising, through propaganda, and they want to deny us our ethnic identity. So we become rootless consumers, debt-ridden rootless consumers. That's what they did in the 20th century.
Yes.
And so this promotion of diversity, you saw that, we alluded to it earlier, talking about the breaking up of the ethnic neighborhoods, and that was done for, political demographic reasons, to deny them their ethnic identity so you could have the American century. You could also impose things like the sexual revolution and the culture agenda of the 1960s could never have been promoted in America, in a pre-1940 America, because everyone would have been in their ethnic parishes, and the communications, the promotion of entertainment just wasn't centralized enough, and you needed everyone going into their getting into their cars, going to work, spending 2 hours driving, getting into their work, getting exhausted, collapsing in front of the TV set to be programmed.
Yeah, because they weren't. They would have to focus on all that, and that'd be less time to think about the political and social economic injustices. Mm-hmm. And all the stuff that the bankers and the state were doing against people.
But they're giving us the 30-year mortgage and the car loans.
Yeah, it's basically perpetual debt. You can never get out of it. It's compound interest.
Yeah,
it's designed that way structurally to continuously keep people in that state of debt.
So if so that basically you're out there working, and this is at the same time they're promoting things. Well, they're promoting suburbia and they're creating leisure time, which isn't a bad thing, but characters like Gloria Steinem, feminism, is being promoted by the CIA. Yeah. At the same time, they're creating the cultural, political conditions. This is also done through the expansion of the university system. The university system is exploding at the very time the cultural Marxists are filling all those roles. There's a lot of ideological and ethnic nepotism going on here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And so just more brainwashing under the guise of opportunity and upward mobility. Then you have the whole sexual liberation thing that's done to dissolve the family. Of course, we mentioned Herbert Marcuse and Wilhelm Reich promoting that sexual liberation as a way to enslaving people. But this weakens the family, of course, and if you weaken the family, it goes through certain phases. You have, the 60s and 70s where you have divorce, these things becoming more prominent. So you have the children of these broken families are damaged, and they have kids, and all of a sudden you have a lot more people damaged psychologically and emotionally through this stuff. And from that you get, and it's in the white papers of, what Planned Parenthood talked about this in the late 1960s, 1969, actually promoting homosexuality through family breakup. Because you have more traumatized kids.
Yeah.
So it's really is sinister, and it's most people find it hard to believe that something like this could be planned out, but it really has been. It's not stupidity; it's malevolence we're dealing with here.
Yeah. These are. See, we're basically good people. We're good, common people. We don't think of these things, but these elites, they honestly, they hold everybody, all humanity in contempt, except their fellow elites. So they don't think anything of killing entire peoples, of doing all these things, robbing them, all these things that they don't bat an eyelid about it. It means, because these people mean nothing to them. Mm-hmm. They're like goyim, or the profane, if you use a Masonic term.
Yeah.
They hold people in contempt.
And one thing that's really particularly clever is they can exploit a grievance that is legitimate on its own, but with no intention of coming to some sort of equitable or fair resolution. I think a good example, and this is just like as when we're talking about the problems of Jewish power, and particularly the Jewish oligarchs, the Jewish organizations, some of the things they're involved in, is when addressing something like the civil rights phenomenon. The civil rights movement was exploited.
Yes, and even someone like Malcolm X, he mentioned this. He mentioned that the more attention that could be taken off, that you have the whites and blacks fighting each other, the less attention can be on the Jews.
Mm-hmm. And
but they were most of the slumlords. And you can actually argue they were actually a lot of the slave traders. And there's been a lot of documentation. And this is the Nation of Islam, Farrakhan's group. He did a lot of research about this, and you also had Professor Tony Martin. These are black people, black scholars who have done this research.
But the civil rights establishment sold out a long time ago, like the Urban League and NAACP. Yes, because the NAACP was a Jewish organization. I think it was the Spingarn brothers that funded it. And
well, that's what identity politics is. It identifies certain corrupt elites within a certain racial, ethnic, or cultural demographic, and then it basically finances them and uses them as their front man, I guess, to control that specific community.
Yeah, you look at the South. I mean, you're from the South, and the South was labeled as not only being racist towards blacks. In some extent, I would say it's a fair criticism given Jim Crow and these, but let's put these things in context, like the horrible so-called American Civil War and the impoverishment of the South and these things.
Yeah.
In the brutal and corrupt occupation during Reconstruction. People cherry pick history to support a narrative that suits their purposes. But, there was no anti-Semitism in the South prior to, at least perceived anti-Semitism in the South prior to the 20th century, but you had this case, the case of the murder of Mary Fagan.
Yeah. I'm actually very familiar with that because.
You want to talk about that? This sets up this reverberates throughout the 20th century, and we have to put the civil rights movement in this context. So
and that happened in Marietta, Georgia, which is it's only an hour and a half away from me. Mm-hmm. So I'm very familiar with the area that happened, and you had this Jewish pencil factory owner from New York. He was well, I guess you couldn't say this was a little bit after Reconstruction, but you can still see like most of the so-called carpetbaggers were
it's like
mostly
1912,
Jewish merchants.
1913, yeah.
Yes, but he had this pencil factory pencil factory in Marietta, Georgia, and he raped, I think she was 5 something, very young.
Oh, very young. I believe she was 13.
Oh, 13. Okay, I thought she was younger.
She was 13, but very pretty and a little mature for her age, to say that.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and he I think raped and then killed her, and there was a public outcry in Georgia at that time, and the ADL was actually founded in reaction to that officially, and but what the ADL doesn't tell people, because the ADL poses as some kind of big, civil rights organization for everybody, but ADL was basically founded to say that it was to basically scapegoat these black guys. These black men in Marietta as the persons responsible, just to get their fellow Jew off the hook. They were trying to pin the blame on someone else, scapegoat them, and that's how the ADL got their start.
This was Leo Frank.
Yes, Leo Frank. Yeah,
he was also local head of B'nai B'rith. We cannot discount that.
Oh, really? Yeah, I didn't. Which is interesting because B'nai B'rith is actually a Masonic organization.
Yes, and this was this example of a brother being accused, and the Jewish power went to the full lengths to keep him from facing justice.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Yeah, because they could easily use their Masonic ties within the court system too. Because actually, this little Frank was actually he received the complicity of the local law enforcement. It was actually it was a local mob which actually brought him to justice themselves, because they broke into the jail that he was in and they lynched him.
Yeah, the governor gave him clemency. And
yes.
They lynched him. They dragged him out and hung him right outside Mary Fagan's house.
Yes.
And what happened was the national press, as it existed at the time, was more or less recruited to call for the acquittal or the retrial of Leo Frank. And you have to put this into context. The South at the time was still recovering from, you mentioned this is just after Reconstruction, but they gave this guy a fair trial, due process. He had 24 women had testified that he was a degenerate and had engaged in degenerate behavior.
Yeah.
And all the evidence suggested he was indeed guilty. But at the same time, this Georgia particularly, but the South in general, is being treated in the press as sort of being this retrograde, backward, anti-Semitic. You can't get a fair trial down there. And the South reacted to this.
Yeah, which is very ironic, because within the U.S., the Southeast is known, as, the South is known 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 as probably the most pro-Jewish region there is in the U.S. I mean, it really is. Like, and even Michael Hoffman has done research about this. That even the Ku Klux Klan was it had Jewish members originally.
Yeah.
And it was a Masonic. Yeah, it was a Masonic. Yeah, definitely. But I mean, everything. It was there was if anything, there was Philo Judaism there. And nowhere did these people, they did not attack Leo Frank as a Jew. They never did. It was purely because of what he did. They were holding an individual who had done something wrong accountable. Mm-hmm. But in the eyes of the Talmud, of the Talmudic ideology that these people have, the ADL and them, you're basically attacking people who are divine.
Yeah, it didn't matter that
the Jews themselves. Yeah, because the Jews themselves is regarded as divine. They're basically deified. So when a so-called goy attacks a Jew, then even that has nothing to do about them being Jewish. It's still considered like almost blasphemous, a sin.
Yes, and this is important because the civil rights issue, integration, would be used to for political objectives throughout the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War, because there was Martin Luther King who was dispatched, I think in 1966, into Chicago to protest these ethnic white neighborhoods.
Yeah.
But he was more or less saying that you cannot exist. Neighbors were defined by their ethnicity. This is how these neighbors existed for a century and a half, and now they're being told they have to disperse. And he was chased out of Chicago.
Yeah, you basically you began seeing how he was being used or manipulated by certain financial interests in the North. Mm-hmm. Because there were legitimate grievances in the South with the Jim Crow, but then, of course, what was he doing in Chicago? What was he doing there?
He had no familiarity with the problems in Chicago, and he's telling some ethnic Lithuanian or some Pole that he's a racist white guy. And the reaction is, "I'm not white, I'm Polish. What are you talking about?"
Yes.
And then, of course, he didn't really get into the crosshairs of the empire until he started criticizing the Vietnam War. Prior to that, he was a useful idiot for empire because he was, again, taking a legitimate grievance, but at the same time being used to weaken, states' rights, states' power, and the Civil Rights Act, and these things. How it was sort of a,
he went to a communist academy, some kind of. There was a communist training facility for leaders. Mm-hmm. It was somewhere in the U.S. at that time, but he was one of the alumni of it. So they were basically indoctrinating him in all this Marxist ideology. Mm-hmm. Because they wanted to use him as a tool.
Yeah.
Because to me the true civil rights leader was Malcolm X. Like, he was the one who was more principled, who he was not manipulated, and you saw what happened to him, how he was assassinated.
That's right. And the Nation of Islam itself had strange funding from was it the Hunt family?
Well, I'm not familiar with that, but I know that their founding is very suspicious. You had I think Fard Muhammad was his name, but he was basically a fraudster. He wasn't even Afro American.
Yeah.
Like he was kind of like the cult leader of his time. Basically, he would come in and take all these people's money and then just disappear. And then the nation, the Nation of Islam, they created a messianic type doctrine to explain his disappearance. Whereas he had just simply disappeared with people's money. That's all it was. He was basically a fraudster.
But you can see how an oligarch like the Hunts would support the same thing. They might support the Klan or white supremacist groups. They support the Nation of Islam. It's divide and conquer again.
Yeah, it goes back to dialectics. Everything. Yeah, definitely.
So I mean,
and it's interesting that ADL. Okay, the ADL, which is a political wing of a Masonic organization. So that's interesting. Number one, but it was actually founded the same year as the Federal Reserve in 1913.
That's right.
So it's a lot of suspicious things to look into.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And also, I guess didn't B'nai B'rith also spawn the Southern Poverty Law Center?
I won't be surprised.
Yeah.
I won't be surprised.
Serves
yeah,
a similar
that's
function. Yeah.
yeah. Which is interesting because they tout themselves, being for civil rights and all that. But I've actually read that they have never hired a black lawyer. The Southern Poverty Law Center, they just don't. They hire predominantly Jewish lawyers.
Yeah, who was that guy who went into the NAACP offices like in 1916 or something and said there are no black people in there?
I think W.E.
Du Bois.
Bois.
Yeah, he went in there and said there are no black people in there.
Yes. And it's interesting because the ADL was actually crucial because W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a book about his travels in the South. And he mentioned a lot about the role of Jewish merchants, and he mentioned about their links to the KKK and all that.
Yeah.
And the ADL actually, had after W.E.B. Du Bois, they put a lot of pressure on him to expunge that from any other edition of his book. But if you find the early edition of that book, I forgot what it's called, but it's very open. It's mentioned about the role of Jewish merchants and how they were in bed with the KKK and all that. But the ADL actually, they put a lot of pressure on W.E.B. Du Bois to just expunge that from any other edition of that book.
Yeah, this is referred to as the Black Jewish Alliance, and
yes,
that spearheaded the civil rights movement. And a lot of times it's written off as Jewish progressivism and their concern for the blacks. Of course, you have the Freedom Riders in the 60s. A lot of these were Jewish students going down there. Of course, we have movies like Mississippi Burning, which mythologize these things. And there were instances of real violence occurring down there. You're going in, you're disrupting, an entire community. There's going to be resistance in these things. Bull Connor wasn't a nice guy. We're not suggesting that. But again, these situations are being manipulated. And not for the purposes of resolving the problems, but for actually exasperating the problems. But
you have these basic people. You have these people basically controlling that they want to like in a very paternalistic fashion because inherently they view themselves as superior to these black people.
Yeah,
because behind their backs. Yeah, because I'd be willing to guarantee you, each one of these so-called freedom riders, Jewish freedom riders, behind their backs, they would call them, they were speaking Yiddish and call them Schwarzers and all this other stuff.
Well, that was what,
and they didn't have a problem with the mostly Jewish slumlords in like New York City, Philadelphia, Detroit, or anything.
Yeah, you focus on the depressed South and make them the victims, make them look worse. When all the riots,
divide and conquer.
All the riots are occurring in Los Angeles and Detroit, and Washington, not in the South. As if there aren't any ethnic problems in the North. But of course, this alliance broke up, and because of that tension, because a lot of the blacks got wise to this. And by the 60s, and you had the breakup of the Black Jewish Alliance, I think, with there's a teacher strike in New York City, where the blacks got uppity, and stopped being controlled by the Jews that were running, the civil rights, activism. But, so I think Harold Cruz wrote a book about this, by 67 it had broken up. But then you have the strange thing in Hollywood, that's being orchestrated by the CIA through MGM Pictures, and they're producing these blaxploitation films. James Aubrey was the head of MGM Studios. He was a CIA asset, and they bring in this guy from Time Life, Gordon Parks, who's a black photographer who had infiltrated the what do you call it? Guys out of Oakland. The black gangs, the black.
The Black Panthers?
Black Panthers, I'm sorry. Yeah, Black Panthers.
Yes.
Well, because he was black, they let him come in and take pictures of him. He was giving pictures to the FBI, but he worked for Time Life, which goes back to Henry Luce, Skull and Bones, CIA. And he directed movies like Shaft, Superfly, and some of these blaxploitation films. This is a part of Hollywood to promote cultural degradation of the black communities, for the very purposes of, I guess, strategy of tension, and also to weaken the black family. Of course, the Great Society didn't help them much. And at the same time, you have drugs being imported into the country, facilitated things like by the Vietnam War, by the CIA. So you have this broad cultural program that's being carried out by the intelligence agencies, working in conjunction with entertainment. Of course, we saw that later in the 80s and 90s with the rap labels being funded by cocaine money coming in from Central America and part of Iran-Contra. Yeah. The point being is again, you have, while they're talking about voting rights and civil rights, they're undermining the things that matter, like family and values and community. And it doesn't really matter if you have a supposed right to vote for Tweedledee and Tweedledum if you never know who your father is. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they want to promote this. Yeah, entirely. They're doing this entirely right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they're still doing it. But what's amazing is that this occurred in the 60s. So, as long as these organizations were serving the interests of the elite, whether it's Jewish power or the CIA, they were able to develop or to go a certain direction. But the moment they got a little off script, they were shut down and destroyed. Like Malcolm X, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, he wised up very early on to what their objective was, and that's why, he in their eyes, he had to go.
And like Martin Luther King, who gives that speech about Vietnam, and then he's shot down.
Yeah.
And of course, you have to also look at all these assassinations. There's a ritual element to it all.
Yeah.
The sort of how the degradation, the violence, that itself serves a function, in society. Not just the act of getting a man out of the way.
Yeah, like a blood sacrifice.
A blood sacrifice.
And it's interesting because you mentioned about the record labels, and there's been some work done about how these certain record labels have certain sacrifices that they have to sacrifice a certain rapper.
And we've seen that, with Tupac Shakur.
Yes.
If you really look into that, that's very curious.
Because all the signs basically point to he was someone that was not going with any of their agenda.
Well,
so he was someone that had to go in their eyes.
He was looking to kind of rein in the gangs, and the gangs are very important in for the intelligence agencies and the banking system, because the gangs are the ones that buy the guns and the drugs and market it in the communities, which capitalize and keep the banks liquid.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a business model here, folks. There's a business model that he was upsetting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And that you had that journalist who was killed, exposing all that.
Oh yeah, Gary Webb, who shot himself twice in the head. So they say it's possible, but I don't know. But yeah, he's the one that detailed the importation of drugs. Yeah, this was Iran-Contra, support of the war effort, the war against the Contras, and this, of course, brings in the Bushes, the Clintons, Mena, Arkansas.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all involved.
Which is important because in your articles, you also write about the false left-right paradigm. And something like that kind of exposes it, the Bushes versus the Clintons. Now, they're really partners in crime. In fact, the Clintons are probably junior partners when it comes to the Bushes, when it comes to the criminal political class, at least.
Yeah. I mean, you see, they all have these links. Let's even look at the Trumps and the Clintons. They were very closely intertwined.
Talk about Donald Trump.
They put up this front of opposition.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Donald Trump's his gambling empire goes back to who? Meyer Lansky, right?
Yeah. I basically saw through the whole Donald Trump thing early on because, you have an interesting thing where, the American people are frustrated with the mainstream media. Mm-hmm. So the establishment. Mm-hmm. So the elites, they recognized that. So then they basically promoted this Donald Trump to come out of, on the political scene, no political experience at all. He was basically one of 17 Republican candidates. Mm-hmm. And early on, you have the media, seizing upon Donald Trump very early on, putting him out in the front. Mm-hmm. And then you had, I think it was, what was his name? Hillary Clinton's campaign guy, the one who did a lot of those emails. I forget his name right now, but yeah, he was he basically talked about using Trump as a Pied Piper candidate.
Okay, yeah. Is that Tony Podesta?
Podesta. Yes. So the elites, they were promoting that because it goes into the dialectic again, because they promote him through the media, but they give him some minor criticism here and there, but they still promote him. They give him a platform, so it's not true criticism, but just enough criticism that then they can have the other pole, because the dialectics works in two poles. It has to have both of these poles of different people polarized against each other. Mm-hmm. So they polarize one group of people to see him as somehow victimized by the establishment media. And I mean, never mind that he has connections to the Clintons and Larry Silverstein and to Goldman Sachs, and he's a big New York City. He has connections to the real estate industry there, the crime, the families, all that stuff. So he is establishment, but the media is set up in a way where just some mild criticism of him, then they could create another dialectic where other people would support him because they thought he was victimized. Mm-hmm. But it was the same agenda, but it's carefully staged. The whole thing is staged.
The mainstream media was so biased against them that it was designed to incite that reaction.
Yeah, and basically it was
on superficial matters, by the way.
Yes, that's what I was actually going to add, because he would say these ridiculous statements that I was telling people early on that he's just saying that just to get support from certain people. He had no intention of doing any of these things.
Well, like
they would attack him on these superficial distractions. Yeah, it was distractions. That's basically what it was. Not on the issues that really matter.
Yeah, like they won't bring up Epstein because, of course, that raises the Clintons' connections to Epstein, and the fact that someone like Epstein was probably a Mossad agent who was getting blackmail information on people.
Yeah, definitely. Yes,
that's what it looks like. I mean, that's what Ghislaine, was Giselle Maxwell, or his father was a
Robert
Mossad
Maxwell.
Agent. Yeah, was a Mossad agent.
Yes. Actually, Viktor Ostrovsky kind of exposed that too.
Yeah. But that seems like the same thing where you have a mansion that's wired and these things and these girls coming in and out So you they're not going to mention that because that opens up a can of worms. But they'll mention other things, with Trump, trivial matters. They don't go into. They won't explore Trump and his gambling, Resorts International, and that ties back to Meyer Lansky, the Mary Carter Paint Company, and the CIA, heroin, the Castle Bank, and the Vatican, Vietnam. It gets really interesting. This would be really good journalism. If these people are actually journalists, that's a great story.
It would be.
But no one wants to look into it.
Yeah, because there's orders on high up, and I'm trying to be an investigative journalist, so it angers me how modern journalism has degraded to the level it is. It's basically it's become reporters more than anything now. That they're basically they're actually stenographers of whatever the agenda of the people who are paying their check, giving them their paycheck. Mm-hmm. And I don't like that approach at all. I mean, so you have these, it's the same status quo system.
Well, it's corporate media, and they're going to resent corporate interests. Sorry.
Yeah, and it goes even more deeper than ratings. Some people dismiss it as ratings, but there's actual agenda behind it.
Because you could say these news stations are lost leads. They're there to there's the same reason why they were set up in the first place. CBS had direct ties back to the OSS and Office of War Information. Robert Walter Cronkite was a psychological warfare agent. Same with Sarnoff and William Perley. They're all intelligence assets, and these networks were set up to control, to manipulate public opinion, to do that very thing that Edward Bernays was doing. And Edward Bernays worked for the government as well. They was involved in propaganda. The same way you transform someone into a jingoist that's willing to go off and get slaughtered in the trenches, the same method is going to use to create like mindless consumers who are willing to go into debt forever to get things.
Yeah, because these are all. Yeah, because they rely on a system of all these industrial complexes, military industrial complexes, the media industrial, all these. It's all interconnected, so they're trying to completely control
complex, right?
The medical industrial, you make people more sick. You treat the symptoms. You don't treat the root causes.
Mm-hmm.
You suppress all these actual cures and the natural remedies and stuff, and then that creates, more people have to, they can't pay the medical bills, so they go in debt more. But they're also sicker more, so they can't resist the elites as much.
Yeah, or they go out, they get harvested to high insurance premiums.
Yes, that's a good example. Yeah, it's a multifaceted attack upon people.
And at the same
time, control people on all these levels.
Yeah, and you create things like medical journals, movies that promote things like miracle cures, heroic doctors, the men in white coats, and this throughout the decades, this sort of media campaign through entertainment, news, Time Life, right? Talk about the Time Life empire. There's Time Magazine that forms your opinion of the world news. There's Life Magazine. Life Magazine will. Everyone looked at Life Magazine. Everyone went to a dentist, looked at Life Magazine at the 20th century, and this formed the idea of what American life was all about. Fortune Magazine, idea of that's money, the worship of mammon, the good life. Then there's Sports Illustrated, sports, the breads and circuses, and every once in a while, once a year, the good life is they bring out an edition with women in bikinis. They get smaller every year
to give you the sexual liberandi.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a multifaceted attack upon people, definitely.
And they don't even know it. I mean, you get so conditioned, you don't even know you're being subjected to it after a while because it's like a fish knowing that he's swimming in water. He's just not going to know it. It's just his environment,
Yeah, it's a mob mentality. You begin to change yourself because you convince yourself that, well, that is how the culture is, so you better adapt. It's the sign of the times. You better adapt. You better give it the program.
Yeah, it's this sort of like it's the way things are. It's natural. It's not even debated.
Yeah, like death and taxes. Yeah. Yes.
What's funny thing is you think it's natural, normal, but it's gradual. Culture moves slow, then it speeds up, but as things disintegrate, I guess. But if you just say, hey, look, I mean, I could go back now and say, look what it was like 20 years ago, how things are different. You see the difference? Oh, yeah, now I see the difference. Go back 40 years. You see the difference?
Yeah, time is actually speeding up. Even in my limited time, because I'm 31, but I've seen how technology, for example, has expanded.
Oh yeah,
I remember big desktop computers with black and white and green screens.
Mm-hmm.
Very slow, the floppy disk and the flip phones. And you look at all these things are so obsolete, basically.
Yeah.
So time is actually speeding up. Like the amount of change that is happening, it's unprecedented.
And as the technology gets better, things like with virtual reality and these things, people get more lost and escape from the reality, and they'd be less likely to be engaged or be in a position to defend themselves. To actually know what's going on in the world, is because as the reality gets worse, the lure of virtual reality gets stronger.
Yeah, and you convince yourself that what's fake is real, and what's a fantasy is real. What's real is fantasy.
Mm-hmm. And the more disengaged you get from reality, is the more willing you are to accept absurdities.
Yes.
Because you don't know. It's like you're just not involved with the real world, so you can't identify the absurdities, and you get more conditioned, more easily. You're more easily hoodwinked.
Yeah, like it could be anything from like on one level, you could say the 6 million. You can say just how that's been. But then it could be something like the day-to-day level. Like, basically convincing people you can save money by spending money.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
that's, yeah.
even on a microcosm level, all the way up to the macrocosm level, you see this, how entrenched this is.
Yeah, you can spend our ways into prosperity.
Yeah, yes.
That's the, I like to do. All with borrowed money. That's the funny thing.
Yeah, money that's not even real.
Yeah.
It's not even backed by anything. It's fake. But they throw it at you, and all these, it's a temptation.
Yeah, money what used to be something you could hold, you could feel in your pocket, jingle in your pocket. And
yes.
It became paper that could be redeemed and such things. And then all of a sudden it became irredeemable paper money. And now we're moving away from paper money.
Yeah, now it's literally nothing. It's they make up numbers on the screen out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. And if I could,
and they say that's what you owe.
Yeah.
And now babies are born into the world already owning the debt. I mean, how unprecedented is that?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's odious debt.
Yeah.
This is the definition of odious debt, which the Bible has a remedy for that.
Yeah, if you look at all these different spiritual traditions, the Bible, the Quran, even Greek, Roman philosophy, mm-hmm. all these different the Taoist tradition. You also have European the pagan systems like Germanic and Celtic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all these systems, they knew nothing about usury. Usury is something that it's artificial. It's something that just like you had, I think Aristotle, for example. Aristotle said that money is barren, so you cannot create money from money.
Yeah, that's why E. Michael Jones titled his book "Barren Metal." And
yeah,
I think he got it from he gets it. I think from not the barber, no, the Merchant of Venice.
Okay. Yes. Shylock.
The idea that money can multiply. I think Einstein said it's the miracle of compound interest. It's a miracle. Yeah. But the funny thing is that human beings can't perform miracles.
No.
So Jesus can multiply the loaves in fish, right? Because by definition, it's a miracle. But the human beings we are bound by the natural laws. But I guess it gets back to compound interest in the secret societies, which use things like alchemy in claiming to violate that transcend the natural laws. Spinning wealth from nothing. And you can look at
that goes back to the Kabbalah.
Yeah, exact magic. It's black magic. It's interesting that finance has been equated to alchemy.
But the irony is that the only documents that do exist that discuss destroying the people.
Look at finance, which is
the Morgenthau
based on
plan.
usury and compound interest. Is alchemy has always been a scam. So,
yes,
even if you could convert base metal into precious metal, that precious metal would no longer be precious and it would become base. Because all wealth comes from, I guess, human effort, labor. It's applied labor. Yeah. But money tends to obscure that. And once you get in the money economy, it has advantages because you can get beyond barter, you can get in trade, indirect trade and exchange these things, and you get prosperity from that. But it's open to manipulation, and obviously history has proven that it's always manipulated.
Yeah, it's not organic. That's how fake it is. It's unnatural.
Which
is unnatural.
Yeah. Which is why the worship of it is idolatry, I guess you could say. It goes back to the Ten Commandments, but the worship of mammon.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to